Jane sat in her room, staring at the ultrasound picture on her desk. The tiny, blurry image of the life growing inside her brought a mix of emotions: fear, confusion, and a strange, unshakable bond. Her mother's voice called from the kitchen, grounding her thoughts momentarily. "Jane, dinner's ready." Elise's tone carried the weight of someone trying to keep the pieces of a fractured family together. As Jane made her way to the dining table, she noticed the tense atmosphere. Elise was stirring a pot absent-mindedly, while Sarah set the table with an unusual firmness. Jacob sat silently, his scarred face unreadable, though his presence always felt like a reminder of the cost of misplaced trust. "Are you okay?" Jacob finally broke the silence as Jane sat down. His voice was soft, but his eyes bore into hers. Jane nodded. "I'm trying. It's just hard." Before Jacob could respond, Sarah cut in. "Hard doesn't begin to describe it. We need answers, Jane. We can't keep pretending this is normal." Jane's chest tightened. "I've told you everything I know. I don't have answers either." Elise shot Sarah a warning glance. "Let's not push her tonight." But the air in the room was heavy, and the tension was palpable. Jane excused herself early, retreating to her room where she felt safer, even if her thoughts refused to grant her peace. Across town, Gabriel Daniels sat in his dimly lit office, staring at his reflection in the glass window. His world felt like it was spinning out of control, and the only thing keeping him grounded was the memory of Jane's smile. It was inexplicable, the connection he felt with her, the pull he couldn't resist. But every time he thought about her, guilt crept in. He had a life he had built, yet this stranger had somehow become the center of his thoughts. The door to his office swung open, and Prisa walked in, her red lips pressed into a thin line. "You're working late again," she said, her tone icy. Gabriel didn't look at her. "I've had a lot on my mind." Prisa stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. "I bet you have." Her words dripped with venom, but Gabriel didn't bite. "Is there something you need, Prisa?" he asked calmly, turning to face her. Prisa smirked, crossing her arms. "Shouldn't I be asking you that? You seem to be finding solace elsewhere these days." Gabriel's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, don't play dumb," Prisa snapped, pulling out her phone and showing him the photo she had taken at the cafe. "Who is she?" Gabriel's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral. "She's no one," he lied. Prisa laughed bitterly. "No one? You look at her like she's the only thing keeping you alive. Don't insult my intelligence, Gabriel." "Drop it, Prisa," Gabriel said, his voice low and dangerous. "You don't know what you're talking about." Prisa leaned in closer, her eyes blazing. "Maybe not yet, but I will. Mark my words, Gabriel. I'll find out who she is and why you're so obsessed with her." Meanwhile, Jane sat in her room, scrolling through her messages. Stephanie had been her rock through this ordeal, but even she seemed to be growing distant. A text from her popped up. "You need to figure out who the father is, Jane. This isn't just going to go away." Jane sighed, her mind wandering back to Gabriel. He was the one person who made her feel less alone, even though she knew deep down she shouldn't rely on him. But how could she ignore the way he looked at her, like he saw all the pieces of her she was too scared to show anyone else? The next morning, Gabriel couldn't resist. He found himself at the park, where he and Jane often crossed paths. She was there, sitting on their usual bench, lost in thought. When she saw him, a small smile broke through her serious expression. "Hey," she said softly as he approached. "Hey," he replied, sitting beside her. "You look tired." Jane shrugged. "It's been a long week." Gabriel hesitated before speaking. "I don't know how to say this without overstepping, but I care about you, Jane, and I know you're going through something big. I just want you to know you're not alone." Jane's eyes filled with tears. "Why do you care so much? You barely know me." Gabriel took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I do, and I don't think I can just walk away." Jane looked at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but the weight of her secret held her back. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means a lot." As they sat in silence, neither of them noticed the figure watching them from a distance. Priska stood behind a tree, her fists clenched and her mind racing. She wasn't just angry anymore, she was determined. If Gabriel wouldn't tell her the truth, she would find it herself. The tension in the air was suffocating, yet neither Jane nor Gabriel could completely detach from the strange comfort they found in each other. Their bond had grown deeper, but little did they know that a storm was brewing, one that would leave no part of their lives untouched. Meanwhile, Jane tried to make sense of her growing belly and the whirlwind of events that surrounded her. Her mother, Elise, and Sarah were more protective than ever, hovering around her like guards. But Jane felt isolated. No one truly understood what she was going through, not even Gabriel. Her best friend, Stephanie, was her only anchor. Over steaming mugs of hot chocolate in Jane's childhood bedroom, Stephanie whispered, "Have you thought about going back to the hospital? Maybe they made a mistake. Maybe... I don't know. There's some explanation for all of this." "I've thought about it," Jane admitted. "But every time I try to call or even step near that place, I freeze. What if the truth is worse than the unknown?" Stephanie took her hand. "You have to face it, Jane. This isn't just about you anymore. You're carrying a life. A child. You deserve answers." But before Jane could muster the courage to uncover the truth, Priska was already one step ahead. Priska's obsession with Jane had grown into a dangerous fixation. Armed with the findings of her private investigator, she now knew Jane's name, her family background, and even the scandalous detail of her mysterious pregnancy. Priska smirked as she stared at the report. A pregnant college girl, unmarried and living with her two mothers? Oh, the irony. Gabriel's little charity project. But as she dug deeper, a horrifying realization hit her like a freight train. The dates didn't add up. Jane's pregnancy timeline perfectly matched the period when Gabriel and she had attempted surrogacy. Panic clawed at her chest. Could it be? Could Jane's child be Gabriel's? Priska's mind spiraled. If Gabriel found out, he'd never let her destroy Jane. Worse, he might leave her entirely. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything she had sacrificed to stay by his side. She needed to take control, and fast. Priska decided to confront Jane directly, but instead of marching up to her door, she devised a more insidious plan. She crafted an anonymous letter filled with lies and half-truths and sent it to Elise. The letter claimed that Jane's pregnancy was the result of a secret affair and that the father was a married man who was already trying to cover his tracks. When Elise received the letter, her heart sank. Doubts crept into her mind. Was Jane keeping secrets from her? Was Sarah right to warn her against trusting Gabriel? Elise decided to confront her daughter that evening. "Jane," Elise began, her voice trembling, "I received this today." She slid the letter across the table. Jane's eyes widened as she read the contents. Her face turned pale, her hands shaking. "This isn't true," she cried. "Mom, I don't even know any married men." Sarah snatched the letter and read it aloud, her voice dripping with anger. "This is absurd. It's just someone trying to stir trouble. Elise, you can't possibly believe this nonsense." "But what if it's true?" Elise whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "What if we don't know the whole story?" Jane bolted from the room, unable to handle the accusations. She ran to the park, the same park where she had first met Gabriel. And there he was, sitting on their usual bench, lost in thought. When Jane approached, her tears streaming down her face, Gabriel immediately stood up. "Jane, what's wrong?" "They think I'm lying," she sobbed. "My mom, my family, they think I've done something terrible." Gabriel pulled her into a comforting embrace. "I believe you," he said softly. "No matter what happens, I believe you." Unbeknownst to Jane and Gabriel, Priska's plot was already in motion. At the same time, Elise was pacing the living room floor, her mind racing. The letter had shaken her, but Sarah's words haunted her more. Sarah was calm now, sipping tea in the corner. "You shouldn't have shown her the letter," she said quietly. "It's not about the truth. It's about trust. Right now, Jane needs us to trust her." Elise stopped pacing. "And what if we're trusting her at the expense of protecting her? What if whoever wrote this letter knows more than we do?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "And what would you do? Hunt down this anonymous accuser? Or confront Gabriel?" The name lingered in the air like a dark cloud. Gabriel. He had come into their lives so suddenly, so conveniently, just as Jane's pregnancy had begun to weigh her down emotionally. Elise bit her lip, recalling his polite manners, his way of making Jane laugh when no one else could. But Sarah was right. How much did they really know about him? And more importantly, what was he hiding? As night fell, Elise sat by the kitchen table, staring at the letter again. Her thoughts churned as she resolved to investigate Gabriel herself. Something didn't sit right, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's safety, and the safety of her unborn grandchild, might depend on the answers she found. That same night, while Elise wrestled with doubts and Jane sought solace with Gabriel, a storm was brewing at the hospital where Jane had first discovered her pregnancy. Nurse Prisa, donning her fake identity with chilling precision, had embedded herself into the hospital's staff unnoticed. Her obsession with control and power had driven her to unimaginable lengths, and Jane's case had caught her eye. Prisa had slipped into the hospital records room earlier that evening. Her heart raced as she typed Jane Rivers' patient ID into the system. Her fingers trembled when the screen revealed an unusual anomaly in the pregnancy reports. 2 files with conflicting dates, 2 fetuses registered under Jane Rivers' name. One file listed her pregnancy as normal, while the other referenced a mysterious surrogacy procedure. Priska's lips curled into a sinister smile. "So it's true," she muttered under her breath. Gabriel and Jane were connected in ways even they didn't fully understand. She quickly downloaded the files onto a USB stick and erased any traces of her access. Her next step was clear. She would confront Jane directly, not to expose the truth, but to manipulate it. Priska's plan wasn't just to drive a wedge between Gabriel and Jane, it was to destroy them both. As dawn broke, Jane woke with sharp, stabbing pains in her lower abdomen. Panic set in as the realization hit her. She was going into labor. She called out for her mother, her voice trembling with fear. Elise rushed into the room, her face pale. "We need to get you to the hospital now," she said, helping Jane to her feet. At the hospital, chaos ensued as doctors and nurses hurried to prepare for the delivery. Prisa, now dressed in her nurse's uniform, watched from the corner of the room, her expression unreadable. Jane didn't recognize her, too consumed by pain and fear to notice the malice in Priska's eyes. As the hours passed, Jane's cries echoed through the hospital halls. Gabriel, who had been waiting anxiously in the lobby, pushed past the nurses and burst into the delivery room. "I'm here," he said, taking Jane's hand. "You're not alone." But Prisa was ready for him. She stepped forward, her voice calm, yet filled with venom. "I don't think you're supposed to be here, Mr. Daniels. This is a family matter." Gabriel froze, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" Prisa smiled. "I'm Nurse Prisa. I've been assigned to Jane's case. And I have to say, it's fascinating how much you've been involved. Almost suspiciously so." Jane's grip on Gabriel's hand tightened as her contractions intensified. "What is she talking about?" she managed to gasp. Prisa leaned in closer, her voice low and icy. "Oh, you haven't told her? How interesting. Maybe you'd like to explain why her pregnancy records list your name, Gabriel?" Gabriel's face turned ashen. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is it?" Prisa countered, holding up the USB stick she had stolen. "Because I have all the proof right here."